welcome everybody. My name is Caitlin Ryan, and I am the Executive Director here at the Cannabis Alliance. And here at the Cannabis Alliance, we are dedicated to the advancement of a vital, ethical, equitable, and sustainable cannabis industry. And that covers quite a broad variety of things, but a lot of our foundation is based in patients' needs and patient advocacy. And we already know anecdotally, and actually I pause there for a moment as I'm watching some of our audience members come on in here today. We know anecdotally already that cannabis is probably our most powerful tool in mitigating the opioid crisis here in the United States. The alarm was sounded over a decade ago, yet still we are seeing things like fentanyl and opioid deaths. That line graph is skyrocketing on up with does not look like it is going to stop. And so having conversations like these where we can talk about the ways that our very powerful plant can actually help maybe get us out of that steep incline and maybe either top it off, or even in some cases we might actually even be able to see a decline in opioid use. Now I will say I've known Maddie for a little while through her work through the National Cannabis Industry Association, and got to meet Steve at the last NCIA event I went to in Washington, D.C. on Lobby Day. And Steve and I were in the same group together, and as we were meeting with legislators, we were talking about a variety of things, including 280E as well as safe banking. But Steve was also sharing the data that you're going to hear today. And, we'd be in with legislators, and a lot of times, or excuse me, their aides, and their aide would listen patiently, especially with safe banking. It's a thing a lot of them had heard several times already. But then Stephen would start talking about this data that they have collected, and immediately the notepads and pens came out, and notes were being able to be taken, questions for follow-up. A lot of people were really interested in this because it is pretty compelling. I'm excited about some conversations we've already started to have about expanding some of that research here to Washington State as well. And so I think that is my excited introduction here. And what I would like to do is introduce you all a little bit more to Maddie and Stephen. Madeline Grant is the Business Development Manager at Management Science Associates, Inc., MSA, and they'll tell you a little bit more about MSA as we move forward. And she focuses there on advancing MSA's medical cannabis research expansion. Madeline previously worked in government affairs for the National Cannabis Industry Association, where she raised awareness on cannabis policy on Capitol Hill while increasing the cannabis industry's understanding and involvement in government affairs efforts. She maintained relationships and worked directly with congressional offices, trade associations, advocates, coalitions, cannabis businesses, and nonprofits. Before her time at NCIA, she worked on Capitol Hill for two members of Congress, Congressman Scott Tipton, CO, Colorado, and Congressman Scott Perry of Pennsylvania. During her time, she worked on health policy and educated other congressional offices on medical cannabis, specifically on the cannabidiol compound. Madeline graduated from the University of South Carolina, receiving her Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Mass Communications. And again, having worked with her in that capacity, is a real powerhouse, and excited to have her here today. Steve Gongaware has more than 3 decades of industry experience across CPG, healthcare drug discovery, casino gaming, cannabis, and information technology. Stephen has been a frequent speaker at numerous industry conferences and university programs. He has a BS in electrical engineering and an MBA with a concentration in bioengineering from the University of Pittsburgh. Stephen's vision is to unleash the power of market forces to improve health and wellness for all using innovative data and analysis. Really, I cannot tell you how excited I am to hear more about this research today. I'll let them take over from here. And then if you have questions, if you're following us on Facebook, feel free to put those in the chat. We'll make sure those migrate over here. And then if you're here, we'll open it up to audience Q&A at the end. So Maddie and Stephen, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Appreciate the introductions. We're very excited to be here. MSA, we've been working on developing the cannabis space since 2017. So we have a lot to share with you today, and don't be worried if we go too fast or if you have questions. We'll have our emails at the end of the presentation if you want to follow up or want to chat or have any questions. So this is our agenda here, what we're going to be going over today. So Caitlin, thank you for doing our introductions. She mentioned, I have been in the cannabis space with the National Cannabis Industry Association. So about 7 years. So really seeing the changes in the cannabis space, but what's most near and dear to my heart is medical cannabis and helping patients since day one when I heard about this policy issue on the Hill. So I'm so happy to be with MSA and helping drive medical cannabis research. Reviewing Just Management Science Associates and what we do. So we were founded in 1963. We're a Pittsburgh-based company. We work across many verticals, many industries with our analytics and our data analytics. And we provide innovative resources for those industries. So, the next slide will list a couple different industries, but, we really pride ourselves on having creative employees and through innovation and, reading data because there's so much you can do with it. So it's very exciting to be in the cannabis space and utilizing some of our, our programs and softwares and patented technology as well. So here, Steve, if you want to go back one, I'll just go over some of the verticals that we're in. So consumer packaged goods, life sciences, TV, digital, and social media, metals and advanced manufacturing, and casino, gaming, and sports betting. So those are a couple of the big verticals we're in. So I just want to talk about our HIPAA compliant multi-patented de-identification software. So this is utilized across all those verticals and that being in the cannabis space as well. So this is HIPAA compliant, privacy is ensured, and Steve will talk about this when we go over the study. And, this brings into the matching and de-identification technology. So, again, following HIPAA regulations, that's super important. Privacy is everything. So Steve will talk about that through our Vireo Health study that we're talking about. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about our cannabis industry services and what we actually do in this space. So we work with dispensaries, retailers, of course, manufacturers, and we're able to use and analyze their point of sales data into which MSA can de-identify that data. So for example, Steve will go into more detail about this, but we recently completed a study with Vireo Health with 8 medical cannabis dispensaries in Minnesota. So we were able to pool the medical patients' information and cross-reference that with our data sets in the healthcare space. So that means, we're able to analyze, opioid reduction over the years of data that we have with the medical dispensaries and then cross-referencing that and working that with the healthcare data. So we can look at not just opioid use decrease, but also of other ailments, so anxiety, insomnia, and, looking at other prescriptions as well. So through our de-identification and our data access, we're able to, compile these incredible real life data studies and analyze demographics. So it's super important because a lot of US research is survey based. So this is actual real data, and we can look at, what products are working for demographics, what, female or male age groups, and then able to analyze that further and dig into that. So why do we need medical cannabis research? Well, this is my favorite slide because this is my history in the cannabis space. Cannabis is a Schedule I substance on the Controlled Substances Act. So that deems it to have no medicinal use and high potential for abuse. So I'm sure you all are aware of HHS's announcement that to recommend to reschedule cannabis to Schedule 3. But that's, that's in my opinion going to be a while into anything changes. It goes to the DEA, then it's open to public comment, and then they need to present on public comment. So in the meantime, in regardless if it, moves to Schedule 3, this is imperative data that needs to be done for the states. Of course, we know that every state is different. Every medical cannabis program is different, but there are similarities when we can cross-reference and integrate it with healthcare data. And I think as more states, more data that's available, the more that bigger the sample size, the more we can, analyze as well. And of course, Caitlin mentioned there's a lot of, could be some doctors or physicians or patients on here. The cannabis plant is highly complex. All the cannabinoids that are in the plant, all the compounds and variations of cannabinoids and ratios. We've begun to do some clinical trials in the United States. Obviously, there's more research in Israel and Europe. But it's just something, every single person has a different endocannabinoid system. So this is something that is crucial to understanding, bare bones of what is working for medical cannabis patients. And also, I just want to, as I've worked for NCIA, as more states bring on full recreational use, there's excitement in the state with recreational use, and it's imperative that we have education for medical cannabis patients. So I've talked to many groups, many doctors and physicians, and this is super important to keep that education readily available. And I think in a lot of states, that's not necessarily, people don't know where to turn. So that's one of MSA's goals, is to open up the resources and education for medical patients. Great. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve to go over the study that I briefly spoke about with Vireo Health. And I appreciate your time. So Steve, if you want to take it away.
Thanks so much, Maddie, for the setup and the background. So yeah, next few slides, we're going to share some actual results from proof of concept study that we conducted with Vireo Health. So it involved about 8,000 patients across 8 of their dispensaries in Minnesota. And, as Maddie mentioned, we're utilizing our multi-patented de-identification and matching technology that allows us to link up the point of sale purchase data from those customers with, in this case, we're linking it up with, real world healthcare data, specifically electronic healthcare records containing people's prescriptions. So there were about 8,000 patients, and this spans the time frame from 2016 to 2022. We matched that up with the opioid, specifically the opioid prescriptions. For those patients, there were about 816 who were currently using legal opioids for pain that are behind this study. And, by the way, we're actively studying people using benzos for anxiety as a follow-up to this. All the results you're going to see are about opioids. So if you know much about opioids, there's like hundreds of legal opioids, and they're not equivalent to each other in terms of the strength or the effect that it has. So we used conversions, and we converted all the different types of opioids into milligrams of morphine equivalent, or MME, per month, so that we could compare apples to apples when we were looking at the opioid use. And then we defined this into three segments. The before period, so people who were using opioids for a period of time before becoming customers of Vireo, and then the period when they were consuming cannabis and using opioids, and then many of the people never stopped using cannabis, but some of them did. So we do have some data on folks who had tried cannabis and then ceased at some point. So the really significant top line result here is that on average, those cannabis patients were able to reduce their use of legal opioids by 30%. So you can see the MME equivalent numbers here. And, while the average was 30, there were certainly, some patients that were able to completely cease, using opioids, and some that had more significant reductions than 30%. We'll see a little more of that later. Furthermore, we looked at THC to CBD ratios to try to get a sense of the importance of that variable on the outcomes. And as you can see from the table here, the relatively higher ratios of THC to CBD were the most effective in terms of having the greatest reduction in the use of opioids, specifically 19 to 1 in this case. And you'll see that some of those lower ratios, 6 to 1 or 1 to 1, had little or no reduction in opioid use. So the by the way, the Vireo shared with us the Minnesota State Health Department recommendations for use of cannabis for pain, and they actually recommended 1 to 1 ratio, which clearly wasn't the most effective according to the data that we have. Furthermore, while that ratio appears to be very important, it doesn't necessarily mean that more THC is better in terms of milligrams consumed per month. We did look at that consumption measure and found that the folks who consumed like 0 to 100 milligrams of THC per month had the greatest reduction. And we also drilled into product form. So here you can see the major forms here that this dispensary has, and found that the tablet form had about twice was like 2 times more effective than almost any other kind of form. And this particularly strong result because for this company, the tablet form was relatively new. So for the many years of the study data that we have, the tablet form was only a recent development for them, and yet it showed a lot of strength. And here we're looking at the sort of a breakdown of preferences for product forms by gender and age as a baseline. This is all patients, but generally the older patients are more likely to prefer capsule and tablet form. Younger patients sort of gravitated towards flower and vape, and males skewed towards flower. And here, looking at the opioid reduction by demographic, you can see that the females versus males had a bigger change in terms of the reduction in NME per month. And also we noticed that relatively younger people tended to have bigger reductions. It didn't seem to be as effective for 65 and over. Something we're presently looking at is that I think the underlying nature of what's causing the pain can be different for different age groups. So, for example, maybe the older group might have pain that's from arthritis, and the younger people might have different sources of pain. And it could be, well, we don't have results on this yet. We're happy to share an update with you all later, but it could be that the nature of the pain is a factor in terms of how effective cannabis is in helping with opioid reduction. Here we also looked at, you know, how many different forms or different products specifically that people purchased. And, um, you know, one of the things you can see in this longitudinal data is the patient journey, right? So they're a new patient. Some of the patients who tended to zero in on the more effective, say product forms or THC to CBD ratios, they kind of found what worked for them very quickly and then stuck with that product. And those customers tended to be more loyal to the dispensary. But we noticed other folks who either, unfortunately, had chosen a particular product that wasn't among the most effective. And then you see them come back and they try a bunch of different products. And then unfortunately they often kind of fall out of the data set. So in Minnesota, until recently, was a medical only state, and they did require, having a pharmacist on site who's available to patients who want to have a discussion with a pharmacist. It's unclear. There's not been much research and data in cannabis because of the Schedule 1 status, and so if they were giving the state recommendation, for example, then unfortunately those patients probably would have had the worst outcomes. So just to kind of recap here, if you focus in on the folks where we had the most data and the biggest reductions, it's quite clear that the younger patients are seeing better results. The female patients are seeing better results. Tablets are definitely the most effective form, and that 19-to-1 THC to CBD ratio is certainly very important from the study we've seen. And I also want to call out, so MSA had done this study with this one company, Vireo, but we've recently teamed with market data, cannabis data leader, market leader, BDSA. Hopefully many of you are familiar with them. If you're not, I encourage you to get to know them. They're a valued partner of MSA, and they're helping us to take this to the rest of the cannabis industry. And so we're also actively looking for additional dispensary companies, MSOs. Actually, doesn't matter whether you have one dispensary or 100. We're interested in conducting some additional studies in different markets to see if we get similar or different results, and then putting together education campaigns to help make doctors, all the stakeholders really, dispensaries, bud tenders, doctors, patients, aware of what products can be the most effective to help with this opioid crisis. So Maddie, I guess I'll open up to you. If you want to add anything, I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, and just to continue on with the call to action, like Steve mentioned, we're working with numerous groups, and talking to groups like the National Clinical Directors Consortium and other groups, Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. Patients are having trouble accessing ways to get cannabis, medical cannabis. So working with all these groups and making a unified resource for them is definitely on one of our missions at MSA. It's super important for patients. I can't even tell you how many times personal friends or friends of family have reached out to me asking me, "Oh, I'm from Maryland. How do I get access to the medical cannabis market, or to how do I find a physician? And just there's so much unknown and uncertainty on top of the stigma already. So we're well on our way to establishing, that unified resource and working with all those groups as well. And I'll pause there. I know we're right at the bottom of the hour, but I guess we can see if we have any questions too.
Yeah. And yeah, if you all have a little bit, we have some questions here in the chat. Do you have a subgroup who completely gave up their painkillers or opioids?
Yeah, there's absolutely people who were able to completely cease using opioids.
Do you have a particular subgroup? Like, was there any indicator? I think maybe it was the question of what might make a person more successful in that regard than another, or is that for further research?
Yeah, I think that would probably be for further research. I mean, the overarching themes of the tablet form and the high THC to CBD ratios, and uh, uh, the other thing would be the if they were younger, if they were female, all those factors contributed to folks who were able to cease the opioids completely.
Yeah. Oops, let's see. Any concurrent reported sleep or anxiety gains?
So we do have the full electronic health record for these people who we were studying. So far, we've kind of focused just on the opioid consumption, but we're also starting to dig into folks who are using sleep Valium or Ambien, other drugs like that. But that's a work in progress for us right now.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. Do you I know like this is a really powerful data analysis tool, and a lot of times when I'm talking, particularly in medical communities, I like to convey that actually the data does exist. It's just a lot of qualitative data and anecdotal stories, which is unfortunately not often how traditional medicine makes policy changes. And so efforts like this to describe it in a more quantitative fashion, I think are really important to move this forward. But I am curious, especially as you've been doing these presentations, have you been hearing stories from, like, have people been sharing their own experiences and getting some of that qualitative data that we all know so well because of what we do?
Some of the Maddie can chime in here too, but it's like close to home at MSA. One of our employees' mother is, unfortunately has terminal cancer and is suffering, from pain, and was given the traditional sort of opioid path, and tried using the opioids and actually didn't tolerate them well, and they tried changing the medication, and that didn't help her either. And because of that, her daughter's knowledge of our work studying cannabis, decided to ask her doctor at a local Pittsburgh well-known hospital that I'd like to try medical cannabis. And he told the doctor, informed her that absolutely you're qualified under the PA medical program. I can help you get a card, but unfortunately I can't tell you what product or form or anything about what cannabis product might help you. And this particular doctor then also said, well, I have other cancer patients that I'm treating who I know, who I got the medical card, and I know they're seeing success with it because I'm not writing them prescriptions for opioids anymore. And unfortunately, there was not really any mechanism for him to know what products they were buying, right? And he didn't have any knowledge to be able to give any recommendation to this lady. Of course, we helped her based on our studies, although Minnesota market is probably not identical, right, to the PA market, but at least you know, we were able to help with some of those insights. But I think there's a real need for that education, you know, component. Well, both for the research to, because there's been so little research that's been done, and then also then, you know, if like what we found here, you find some strong results, you know, sharing that with the relevant stakeholders so that, you know, patients can benefit.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, you know, my time in DC, I've worked with a lot of vets as well, and having conversations with them. There's a lot of groups that are advocating for reform in opioids in general, because hearing the stories of some vets being put on, you know, 6 or 7 opioids and to try to mitigate their issues, and then finding relief through cannabis. There's a lot of you know, amendments on the Hill looking at that as well. But these specific, you know, stories we hear of people's lives being changed for the better and left, leaving opioids behind and finding relief through cannabis is huge. And you know, so this data can essentially, you know, help guide that path into that education Steve was talking about as well. Because you know, not to go to the, you can't go to a primary care doctor and make an appointment through your insurance. It's a little bit harder to understand, you know, what your state is doing and what the medical cannabis program's doing. So it's definitely essential for medical patients.
Yeah.
And a little, you know, a little frustrating too, because I've seen it change people's lives for the better. And you know, when I was working on the Hill, I would see constituents moving from Pennsylvania to Colorado for kids that had debilitating epilepsy, and that CBD oil was the only thing that was helping them. And so families were literally uprooting their lives to move to Colorado. So
Oh no.
ailments, not being able to try cannabis as a alternative pain management medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and even with the number of medical states now that we have in the US, we're still seeing some of those medical refugees just because of access to quality products, you know, state-run programs being challenging. And then again, just the in general medical profession, you know, I've shared, I've got a kiddo with epilepsy myself. And, you know, the neurologist, when we started talking about cannabinoid therapy, said, great, good luck. I can't wait to hear what you find out. And that was the guidance for you you received. And that's not atypical. And so yeah, getting this kind of data so that we can normalize these kinds of conversations are, I think, really, really important. I want to open it up to our live audience here. We had a couple in this chat here, but feel free to go ahead and raise your hand if you want to make a comment or ask a question of Maddie and Stephen. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye.
Yeah, I've got a generic question about the changing Washington attitude towards increasing funding for clinical across the board and marijuana. And I guess my question is, the first wave has been getting the DEA to license more source reliable cannabis products outside of Old Miss. As we all know, they're delivering something like 7 to 9% THC in flower, which is typically not what you're going to find across the country in retail. And then that's colliding with the efforts of Senator Hickenlooper, Senator Rosen in Nevada, of course, Earl Blumenauer. You know, they've all gotten commitments in the millions of dollars to expand cannabis research. So where are those millions of dollars?
Yeah, no, really good question. You know, the Medical Cannabis Expansion Act passed I believe it was last Congress, and that was, you know, the first actual cannabis legislation to pass and be signed by the president. So that's the thing. The slow up is within the agencies. So, you know, when people, and this has been a point of contention with doctors and you know, universities and people that want to research cannabis, is the holdup with the applications. So the agencies, you know, Congress has put the pressure on, you know, them to, you know, grant these and these allocated funds and these licenses to research. So, and that's always, you know, a point with these agencies. Things just take time. But I can also double check, and there may be some more recent news, but that's what I know of that. But the good thing about, you know, what we're doing too is we work directly with cannabis operators that are in the market. So, for example, you know, as Steve talked about Vireo Health, we work and partner with these operators. And of course, these are state legal companies. The product is tested, it's safe, it's regulated. And we're able to, you know, analyze that data and get moving on this now. And, you know, depending on, you know, you talk about Old Miss and the product and the monopoly on research, I think that will branch out. And I obviously with HHS's announcement to reschedule to Schedule 3, but I think it's just going to take some time everything does in government. So in the meantime, you know, we can work with these companies that, you know, want the medical cannabis research and get some things moving. But also I can circle back with you, Lloyd, and give you some more information on specifically what you're asking about.
Thanks, Maddie. I know
Yeah.
real quickly the millions of dollars, for instance, Hickenlooper put into the infrastructure bill, $30 million amount to study impaired driving. And through NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation, they don't even know that. So it's at a disadvantage to our industry that the FDA calls for research, the obviously the DEA calls for research, yet we can't literally do it on a wide scale. And so I compliment what you're doing because it's really jumping over that problem gap.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, when HHS made the announcement to reschedule, there was definitely mixed reviews in the cannabis space. You know, a lot of, you know, people felt like momentum would be lost to deschedule and decriminalize completely if we reschedule. But still, it being moving from a Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is it's progress. It's literally in the most aggressive category, deeming it no medicinal benefit. It makes no sense at all. So we commend you know, the progress that HHS is making. So, you know, this should have happened a long time ago, but you know, things take time, especially at the federal level. So we're going to continue to I'm going to keep an eye on that and what the DEA says.
Yeah, and you know, and to your point too about that monopoly, I agree. I'm delighted with the work that the MSA is doing, and I believe Dr. Simpson is on here with the University of Washington, and we're partnering on a program where with some federal research dollars around worker safety, and it's the interesting sort of side steps that we have to do in order to be able to test the product through that study. But there are slowly ways of doing that, and now instead of needing to wait. But I think it's showing projects like these that show that there are steps that can be taken so that it is safe, it is regulated. I think will open the gates further and further for more studies to be done on that. Let's see, John Kingsbury.
Hi there. So first of all, I'm really thrilled that you're doing this work. You know, in my community, stories of people coming off of opioids or reducing them drastically are absolutely routine. So it's really nice to see some scientific analysis put to it. And I think that's thrilling. On the flip side of that, in a state where patient privacy isn't taken very seriously, I'm a little bit horrified by the notion that you're matching retail store purchases to individual use and patients. And if you could describe that a little more for me, how that happens, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So we're utilizing that multi-patented de-identification and matching technology. It meets all the HIPAA requirements. It basically takes 5 key fields: first name, last name, date of birth, gender, and zip, and then that gets tokenized into some, like a code, basically, that is non-reversible. There's no way to know who that person is. You just know there is a unique person with these tokens associated with them. And the data, actually, the raw data that includes the personal identifying information, never leaves the provider of that data, right? The collector of that data. Only the de-identified tokens are used, and then we do that on the healthcare side. We do the same thing. So, and then we're able to match the tokens together, but it's completely non-reversible. There's no way to ever know who that person is. You only know that there exists a unique person in this data set and in this other data set, and then you can do analysis with it. But it meets all the, we have a large life sciences division, and we're provider of de-identification services to, many of the large healthcare data providers that are out there. They're relying on us to make sure we don't run afoul of the privacy laws that our country has, the HIPAA laws. I don't know. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
I think you are. Is there any consent on the part of the purchaser or the patient?
Yeah, there's consent on the healthcare data and the person who's signed up with the dispenser.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. Sean.
Hello. Thanks for doing this. And I was curious if there was any look at, or if these patients were taking whole plant medicine versus THC CBD isolates, and then your overall impression on synthesizing cannabinoids and Schedule 3 and how all that might play out in your opinion.
So I believe it depends on the form that they were consuming. So, for example, I'm pretty sure the flower consumption is the whole plant, and that the tinctures and tablets are isolates. I don't know that we were, the data set didn't specifically specify how the different products were synthesized, but my working assumption is that probably the only whole plant was the flower. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Your impression of synthetic cannabinoids on the health of a person and the Schedule 3 suggestion.
Maddie may have differing views from me, but
yeah, so go ahead, Steve. You go first.
Okay. So, I mean, we've seen some other research that seems to indicate that, well, first, let me start off by saying I definitely believe in the entourage effect, and that the combination of the terpenes and the various cannabinoids is somehow helping in the effectiveness. But I have seen research that indicates that, what can I say, that it sort of suggests that it's not always synergistic, right? So I saw one paper, I came across one lady at a conference that showed a paper where she was studying multiple terpenes, and each of the terpenes individually had a greater effect than the combination of the two terpenes. So it turned out in that one particular case, and don't ask me what terpenes they were, but you know, there seems to be some indication that, you know, Mother Nature created the plant to serve the needs of the plant, not to serve the needs of humans, you know, in my opinion. And while you know, so it could be that they're, you know, having some derivatives, removing certain components or enhancing certain components might actually be more effective. But Maddie, you would have some comments on that?
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point with some synthetic cannabinoids. I've had some conversations with some folks over the last couple of weeks. You know, that's something that's, it's just good to keep our eye on. I don't say I necessarily have an opinion quite yet. I'm speaking with a couple different groups, and like Steve has done reading research and such, but that's a really good point. And you're seeing more and more companies fall into the synthetic cannabinoid manufacturing. So I think that's super important to take note of for further studies and such. And you have mentioned the HHS announcement. So you know, this was very exciting news from DC. For anything to happen involving cannabis in DC is exciting news. HHS. So if cannabis were to move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, this would fix the 280E issue, which would be a big deal for cannabis operators to access capital. But also it you know, deems it to have medicinal use. So it opens up it up to research as well. So we've been talking to, you know, some states, and there's actually, you know, allocated funds in the regulations, but because it's federally a Schedule 1 drug, they can't access those funds to do the research. So it's making it very difficult for the states to do what they need to do because there's no federal guidance whatsoever. So there's nothing from the FDA. So this would actually, you know, be helpful. And the conversation is, you know, that people are worried about enforcement of the FDA. But from what I've been hearing, it wouldn't be overly enforced, as states have developed their medical cannabis programs and recreational programs. It's just a matter of those details working themselves out, and you know, when the DEA makes their recommendation, then it's open to public comment as well. So did that answer your question, or do you have anything more specific you wanted to ask on HHS? Or
yeah, pretty much. You know, what I'm having a hard time with, and maybe you guys can guide, is how to square whole plant flower into a Schedule 3, right? Because that can't be standardized, right? And
Yeah.
so my fear is that the Schedule 3 will just simply invite in more synthetics, right, and isolates. And
yeah, I hear your concerns, and I actually asked this question too. If you send me your information, I can send you some resources that I use to kind of wrap my head around HHS's announcement. The thing is, you know, with this announcement, there is so much unknown to what that regulatory framework is going to look like. So that's, you know, that's important because we can speculate. You know, what will the FDA do? How will they impede? Will they impede on just medical cannabis, or will it be recreational? How does that work? You know, so there's a lot of unknowns, and I think, you know, we just have to kind of wait it out for right now until it opens to public comment after the DEA. And this is a completely independent study as well from the administration. So it's simply just the FDA and the DEA working. And then they present their findings, and then it comes to public comment. So we're still ways away from, you know, the action, if it were to cannabis were to reschedule from that happening. But I'm happy to send you some. There's a 2-hour webinar that I watched twice, actually. It's with the Cannabis Bar Association, International Cannabis Bar Association. So some of the top attorneys in cannabis who I've had the pleasure of working with in the past, I can provide those links to everybody post webinar if that's helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess I would just conclude from Stephen's comments that it's assumed that most of the cannabis that was consumed during your study was actual whole plant flower.
Yeah.
In the flower category.
In the flower category, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
And then I would love to follow up on the question, mostly because here in Washington State, I know it's happening in other states, but I know it's kind of happened here first before it started spreading everywhere. There is a little sort of faction contingency that is pushing the limitation of high potency cannabis products, and by potency they're referring to high THC percentages, and some sort of challenging conversations around that. And I think that that's also a really important part of your study, was sort of identifying that actually that higher THC was impactful. I'm kind of curious about some of the conversations you've had around that particular finding.
Yeah, you know, that's definitely a conversation that comes up a lot, high potency products. And I think a lot of that is, you know, fear-based, but, you know, well deserved as well, because I think, you know, in the cannabis space, in the medical cannabis space and recreational space, that education isn't there. So we all know about cannabis and, you know, the basics of, if you consume an edible, it takes up to, you know, 30, 40 minutes to see those effects. If I was a person that didn't know anything about cannabis, I would have no idea. So it's just, and it's legal in states. So people, you know, that misinformation is, I definitely see as an issue, and the lack of education. So I understand the high potency conversation, but I do have to say, I think, you know, everybody's endocannabinoid system's different. So depending on the type of person or what you're trying to, if you're a medical cannabis patient and what you're trying to treat with cannabis, some of that sometimes is necessary. So Steve, do you have anything else to add to that? That's kind of just my general thoughts on that.
I just reemphasize that while that ratio we found was important and the relatively high ratio was important, the interesting thing to me was you didn't necessarily need that many milligrams, right, of THC over the month time frame, but the ratio is important.
Yeah, and also just to add to that too, it's important, you know, as states legalize full recreational use, you know, there is also these conversations like for recreational use, right? So fun. So if someone doesn't want to, you know, doesn't drink alcohol and wants to consume, you know, so those conversations are happening too. And those would, you know, sometimes be higher potency products. But I think the main key of high potency is that education has to be there, or it's dangerous, you know, depending on how the person reacts and how their endocannabinoid system reacts to cannabis. I think education is 100% needs to be, you know, more useful and available for medical cannabis patients and for recreational use.
100%. Thank you both for being here today and for being so adept at answering such a wide variety of questions about these things. I look forward to talking more about how we can maybe get some more data collected here in Washington State. Do either of you have any final thoughts as we wrap up?
I just like, oh,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, I appreciate everyone's questions. I'm happy to talk or chat anytime. You could probably tell by me answering policy, my background's policy. So if there's anybody that has any questions in the cannabis space or the medical cannabis space, feel free. I'll drop my email in the chat, but I really appreciate it. And we look forward to sharing more research as we get more studies under our belt.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, if there's anyone on the call who, and you know, Maddie touched on this, but who's, you're an operator or someone who might be interested in working with us to further the research in terms of other data partners or whatnot, please do reach out. And my email was just first initial last name like Maddie's, so feel free to reach out to me as well. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you both. Here at the Cannabis Alliance, we are dedicated to the advancement of a vital, ethical, equitable, and sustainable cannabis industry. And it's conversations like these that help us get closer to meeting our mission. So thank you, everybody, for this great discussion today. I hope you have a great rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.